You're listening to the Empowered Divorce Podcast, where you practice being the chooser in your life again, one day at a time. Thanks for joining me. Hello, my amazing listeners. I am so excited to share with you this episode, a conversation that I had with someone that I admire, someone's work that I admire, which focuses on healthy sexuality. I am thrilled to introduce Jennifer Finlayson-Fife. She is a relationship and sexuality coach. She has a PhD in counseling psychology. Her teaching and coaching focuses on helping individuals and couples create greater connection and passion in their emotional and sexual relationships. In addition to her private practice, Dr. Finlayson-Fife has created 5 empowering and highly reviewed online courses. Each course was designed to give individuals and couples the tools requisite to creating healthier lives, stronger intimate relationships. Dr. Finlayson-Fife also offers many workshops and retreats where she teaches these life-changing principles in person as well. She is a frequent guest on many podcasts that have subjects around sexuality, relationships, mental health, and faith. She is also the creator and host of Room for Two, which is a very popular sex and intimacy coaching podcast. I invited her to come here and talk about healthy sexuality specifically after there has been sexual infidelity, abuse, and betrayal in this area, and how scary it can be to lean back into a sexual relationship, especially for those of you who might not know what the heck healthy is. I couldn't think of anyone better to have this conversation with me than Jennifer. And so I hope that you find a lot of value as much as I did in this conversation. Enjoy. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really do value your expertise. It's a conversation that I've wanted to have with my audience and talk about sexuality and sexual healing and learning what healthy is after such a destructive, unhealthy experience.
Yeah.
And I could not think of anybody better that I want to share that convo with than you. So I really do appreciate you taking time
Sure.
to talk
No
to them.
problem.
Will you just introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. So I'm Jennifer, and I am a therapist and coach and teacher. I got my PhD in counseling psychology, and I wrote my dissertation on Mormon women and sexual agency. I grew up Mormon, and I saw, the reason that I think I came to this question is that as I started training, I had a lot of LDS or Mormon women come to me, and I was looking at and understanding better some of the deep anxieties about sexuality and being a woman who's desirable, and can I be a religious person and also a sexual person, but also a kind of fundamental hierarchy that was in the marriage, that many women had grown up learning. So I wrote my dissertation on this topic about who were the women who had a deep sense of agency and who didn't, and how did women relate to the messages they'd received. And so has led me then into work where I work mostly with a religious population, but I'm working with the question of how to develop sexually intimate relationships, healthy relationships, joyful relationships, and work with people in the spectrum of belief, but also the spectrum of experiences, some having more traumatic ones, some having just more normative developmental questions. But, I podcast and do online courses and all that. So, yeah.
You do a lot.
Yeah.
You do a lot. And I try to follow as much as I can because your work that is based off that dissertation that just seemed to catapult you into this whole genre of information and podcasting has been so valuable. I know that part of my own journey, I did experience betrayal in my first relationship. Like you, I had a lot of that cultural influence around sexuality, my sexuality, sex in a relationship. It really effed with my brain. It effed with my body, played a big part in my experience of trauma. And I do see that a lot with other religious women and men that grew up with a lot of those same cultural beliefs and references. And so I think just unpacking a lot of that is a journey in of itself.
Yes.
That I think adds to the nuance of this topic and how to have healthy sexuality. You said the hierarchy and patriarchy that often also exist in this type of culture and marriage relationships add a pornified culture to that as well, which a lot of my listeners have experienced, where pornography, prostitution, infidelity of the sorts have been
Yeah.
such a huge part of their injury. What I've noticed in my clients is that there's a lot of fears that they have through divorce. So a big part of my listeners are divorced or in that process of divorcing. And it's interesting how I actually remember my brain doing this before divorce was even on the table. I remember thinking, there's no way in hell I'm going to get into another relationship and expose myself to this again.
Mm-hmm.
I also see a more hypersexual experience post-divorce from this. So I want to hold space for those of you listening that might not share that viewpoint, but that was my experience. And I do see that more often being the case. Never going to touch that again, shutting that down,
Right.
which I don't know if you see it this way, but it's interesting, Jennifer, because I see that as a form of self-betrayal as well,
Mm-hmm.
because it's still shutting down your sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, there
but
can be an invulnerability in hypersexuality,
yeah,
right? There can also be, and or, because they can go together, a self-betrayal in it. So I have seen some women who come out of traumatic divorces, traumatic early experience, and they shut sexuality down altogether. There's that group. There's also people that they want to be sexual, but they do it in a detached way. And it's because I don't want to let anybody matter to me, but I still want to have sex. Or I want to do to others what I feel has been done to me. And so that can be more of like a detached way of being sexual. And then there can be a hypersexuality that comes out of still this like needing to be loved, wanting to be loved, but there's a self-betrayal element in it. It's still in the kind of earning frame, which
yes.
that can also be there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when you're sexually rejected by your partner
Mm.
in that marriage, and then you find out that partner's been sexually involved with another
Unfaithful.
woman or other
Yeah.
things,
Mm-hmm.
that rejection also, I think, creates a lot of that anxiousness.
Yes.
So it's not even that they're not even seeking sex so much as they are seeking being seen and feeling wanted, desired.
Mm-hmm.
Desirability comes in.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many nuanced
Yeah.
ways that this shows up. But
Yeah.
ultimately, what I would love to hear you talk about is the fear of having sex again after it's been unhealthy sex. What the heck does healthy sex even look like? How will I know if it's healthy
Mm-hmm.
sex? Having the fear of being compared, because that part of that unhealthy betrayal is a comparison, right? You thought that your partner was only looking at you, having sex with you, being intimate with you. Now he's brought in other people,
Mm-hmm.
virtual or not, to that relationship. And so obviously the comparison and that comparative brain jumps in. So now it's like, well, that's going to carry over. So what if I'm being compared
Mm-hmm.
sexually in that new relationship? Fear of not being able to recognize the red flags. So I'll stop there because there's so many. How would a person, male or female, but how would a person start to recognize healthy sexuality?
So, I mean, there's often a double challenge, and this isn't always true, but a lot of times people who have been betrayed in a marriage know betrayal well, like it already happened to them as children. So that is to say, this isn't always the case, but there is oftentimes people are entering into less than healthy relationships without even really knowing that they are, because it's what they know.
Yeah.
They don't expect to be loved. They don't expect to be known and cared about. They don't yet know how to hold their own in a relationship, right? Like,
Mhm.
just going to my dissertation again, the women who, even if they'd grown up in the LDS culture, the women that like were clear that they were equal to men, were clear that they had value, they were clear that what mattered to them should matter in a marriage, they were having great sex. They were doing just because they wouldn't marry somebody who saw it differently than that. And they could hold their own in the marriage. The women who struggled much more, and unfortunately, this was the majority of the women I interviewed, they had familial experiences that taught them that their needs and desires and feelings were secondary or not that important. And then they had a kind of religious layer that kind of reinforced that idea. And so then they went and intuitively recreated it. I don't mean to say that they were married to a great guy and they were sabotaging, although that can happen. Just that they were recreating a meaning because it was what they knew. And
Right.
so a lot of times when women have, or anybody has been betrayed and they're confronting, I thought my marriage was one thing and I'm recognizing it's another. The disillusionment is so painful and so maybe even reinforcing of a fear that was already there.
Mhm,
It's
mhm.
very hard to say, okay, well, hey, you should just trust again. I mean, that's just not a great idea because you have to sort out what was the data that I was missing.
Yeah.
And I think that in a way it challenges your faith in life and in love because I think to get healthier in some respects is to trust in life, even though your experiences have taught you not to. It's
Mm.
to trust in your value, even though your experiences have taught you not to.
Yeah, yeah.
And not to trust that anyone will love you and just to jump back in, but to trust that you could be loved, that you could find somebody that you could create something better with. But in some ways, that your patterns point you in to something that is more familiar, but not good for you.
Yeah. Well, when you're talking, my brain goes to the autonomic nervous system, like how our autonomic nervous system, which starts to develop like in utero, right when we have these attachments and what we're exposed to, what we're used to, and how our system internally begins to be wired. And so, what compromises do we make relationally and with ourselves in order to stay attached to primary caregivers? That's what I'm hearing you really
Mm,
say is that carries through our life and into relationships
mhm,
subconsciously for most of us because we don't learn about
mhm.
autonomic nervous systems growing up. But that
Or
how
just
system is
because we
wired.
don't even know another way. Like
We don't know.
we meet somebody and part of the reason we're attracted to them is it's familiar,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
We
Even if it's
recognize a
unhealthy.
pattern. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And so it's until the unconscious becomes conscious, we can't change it. We can't even
Right.
understand that we're repeating something. Mhm.
Right. I think I've heard you enough, fair to say we're on the same page with really this question that I think we both get quite a lot of what is healthy and how will I notice healthy? What I'm hearing is a turning towards the self and looking at the self because what I see is we're looking externally and outwardly to determine what that is. So, can you
Mm.
talk about maybe some ways of how women and men can turn towards themselves?
So I think one sort of the general idea is that I have to figure out on some level what happened, what went wrong.
Yeah.
Who was this person I was married to and who was I relative to them? How did I participate in something unhealthy? Now, I'm not saying like it's your fault or like, I don't mean it in a simple minded way like that, but just what can I learn about what I was blind to in this other person? Why was I blind to it? I mean, this can be the hardest thing. It's like, wow, they got below my radar. And how? What is the thing that they were either manipulating in me? What was the hope that they would exploit in me? What was my own willingness to lie to myself because I couldn't handle the possibility of seeing who I was actually with? Again, the
Mhm.
goal is not about blaming. The goal is about seeing oneself better because if you can't change what you can't see.
Right.
And so that process of better understanding, where did I learn that pattern? Where did I learn to expect so little if that's part of the pattern? Where did I learn to not trust my own intuition if that's part of the pattern? Because
Rationalize, justify, minimize.
yes,
Yeah.
because there's often tremendous signals. I mean, that is, there's often many signals, including your own intuition, just telling you something's off. But what I've seen a lot of people do is because that's so terrifying, because I can't handle the possibility that they're being unfaithful, because I'm so afraid of what it means about me or whatever it is, I'm going to deny it. I'm going to push away from it.
Mhm.
And it's all understandable, of course, but until I can better understand what I'm doing and how I learned to do it on some level, I'm going to have a hard time doing it differently because the only way how to say it, the way you get healthier is you develop your way to it. And it is an act of faith. You're reaching for something you don't fully know, but that part of your heart believes in, your soul believes in.
Yeah.
And you're reaching towards something that is compassionate towards you and another person.
Mhm.
You're not turning yourself over to another person. I would say you never do that in a healthy relationship. You don't turn yourself over for someone to take care of you and make your dreams come true. That will never go well. But you start being able to have enough self-respect that you look for someone who respects you and you don't accept less than that,
Right.
you know?
Self-respect and a sense of self.
That's
Because
right.
when you know your body and how your body responds and you're paying attention to the cues that your body's giving you, because you've connected to that sense of self and body, mind, and spirit, that's your barometer of healthy,
Right.
not how someone is responding to you. Um,
Yeah, that you're being
right?
true to yourself. You're in
Yeah,
sync with yourself. You're at peace with yourself in the
right,
other in the relationship.
right.
And of course, relationships can get tricky in the sense that they ask things of us. I mean, we
Yeah,
are attracted to people that are different than we are. We're not just finding somebody that's going to validate and support everything that we think and feel.
right.
So, where it can also get trickier is where is this? Am I self betraying to make this accommodation, or is this an act of love? Am
Yeah.
I undermining something that's really good and important in me
Mhm.
just to be in the relationship? Or am I letting go of something that's important because I do love this person and I care about their well being? And
Yeah.
so you do feel your way towards it. And I think I can't recommend enough having a wise, especially if you're moving from a situation in which there's been trauma and loss, the importance of having a wise person to talk to regularly to help you see what you don't see, to
Yes.
help you consider your relationship to your own dignity,
Yeah. Ooh, I love how
because
you
you're
phrase that.
grappling towards something that you don't yet fully know.
Right. Yeah, I 100% agree with that, which again, while you were talking, I'm seeing like two different topics here also, where there's this owning your own sexuality, which a lot of women, especially and men that grew up in a intense religious culture that didn't talk about sexuality or just not getting that from primary caregivers. I know that's just generational too, but when you don't know what owning your own sexuality even looks like versus what a healthy sexual relationship looks like, I think they're two different experiences and things to consider. Can you talk to that just a little bit?
Sure. So owning your sexuality, it's a phrase that I say sometimes, but I don't know if I've been clear enough about what I mean by that. What I would say is the way I talk about it now, which I think is a little clearer, is integrating your sexuality. That is, I think all human beings have developmental work to do, which is to come to peace with their humanity, to come to peace with the fact that they are sexual, to come to peace with our passions and appetites in a sense.
Hmm.
And what I mean by come to peace with it is that you can accept this part of being human, that you're a sensual being with desires, that you can accept this part of yourself and also make choices that accrue to your well-being,
Yeah.
right? So that is there's just developmental work there to do with oneself. And take it away from sexuality for a moment and just think about it in terms of another passion such as food. We often are in this struggle around, how do I relate to this pleasure in a way that's good for me, that
Hmm.
allows me to enjoy life, to enjoy good food, but not to work against my health or, my sense of my own self-respect. And that's just a process of learning how to do that, and learning how to do that with our sexuality also matters. It's not just I don't just promote like, oh, just sex positive. I think that's too narrow of a perspective. Like, I don't actually even think that sex is good, quote unquote. I think sex can be good, but it depends on how I'm not saying it isn't good either. I'm just saying it depends on what we're doing with it, whether or not it's a good thing in our lives. because
Yes.
sex can be very bad for us depending on how we're relating to ourselves and our sexuality and another person. And
Yes.
so it's a powerful part of being human. So being wise and prudent about how we're in relationship to this is important. And so there is an element of self-acceptance and making choices that accrue to our dignity and the dignity of the person we love.
Mhm.
So that's important. And it's not that while how others relate to you as a sexual being is going to shape how you think about that. Like if you had parents that loved you and were boundaried and they were comfortable with their sexuality and they were protective of you, and you're going to have an easier time seeing your desires and your sexual nature as a good thing or a good enough thing to be able to accept yourself and make choices that will never undermine you. But if you
Right.
grew up in a family where your desires were undermined, or people were not boundaried, or they took from you, or were sexually exploitative, or even looked at you in ways that demeaned you, right? These are ways that then it really impedes this question of what is my sexuality and can I accept myself and my sexual nature or not? But it's just very, very important work because it shapes who you're going to let in.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Because if you're not clear and then you find somebody who you think is either going to make it love you into accepting yourself, that's a dangerous position. Or if you're not clear, you're going to have a hard time tracking that the person I'm partnered with isn't clear about my dignity either. And so then until that internal compass is clear enough, you're going to be vulnerable to being too dependent on another person to manage the question of your value, and
Yep.
also possibly not able to see that they're not one to hand it over to in the first place.
Yeah. My gosh, everything you said there's gold. I'm hoping that listeners rewind that if you need to.
Mm,
It what I continue to hear as you're talking is the importance of turning towards yourself first. So going back to again the general population of my listeners experiencing trauma, navigating the healing of that. This is why it's
mm,
so important to I just say date yourself first and explore these things, not only your template, how you think and feel about yourself, your body, your sexuality,
mm,
humanity. It is so important to be clear with that because you do bring that into your relationship and it impacts what you allow into your
mhm,
experience. One thing that I think is just a little more, what's the word I'm looking for? Tangible in terms of a fear is the actual act of sex again after
mm,
sexual betrayal
mhm,
abuse. I'm going to leave this up to your comfortability of
mhm.
talking. So please, I don't want to open up a
I'm
conversation
sure
you
I'm going
feel
to be
comfortable.
fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just
No,
want
I
to make
talk about it
sure.
all the time. Yeah.
Just want to make
Mm,
sure. But I do like going there because this is those things that my ladies especially really think about. And I keep saying ladies, but I know I have my male clients that are worried about the actual act of
sure.
sex after there's been this injury and worried that, again, we have a spectrum, those that are waiting to have that in the bonds of marriage versus those that want to explore that because they're afraid that if they get married, then they're stuck.
Mm,
So I want to honor all of those spaces, and I can speak to this a little bit because I have since in a new relationship, new marriage, and
mhm,
know what that fear is like
mhm.
when you don't know anything but unhealthy.
Right.
So I would love to
Yep.
help empower women. Again, I think I know the direction of the conversation, but I would love to help empower women who have this fear
Yeah.
actually having sex again.
Yeah. Well, so what I would say is that in general, and I know this is maybe something that would scare some people, what I'm going to say is that you really shouldn't rush ahead of where you can be genuinely. And I think we have too narrow of a view of sex to say intercourse. And I'm a fan of intercourse. I'm not trying to like diss it in any way. Okay. But to better appreciate the sensuality, learning to be intimate and erotic and connected is way more important than intercourse per se. And when we get too goal focused and that this is going to be the measure or this is what I have to do or it's all in the wrong meaning. And it can work against actually creating an experience where you can be present and be
Mm,
sexual.
mhm.
And so especially if there's been trauma, it's all the more reason to slow that down and to I don't mean you just want to like step away and not deal with it, because I think the way that we grow is much like exercise. You don't grow into a strong person by just doing the things that make you comfortable, but you also don't leap way ahead of where you can be and go just immediately to the weight machine and put it at the goal area,
Yeah,
because
I
you'll
don't
hurt
go in and
yourself.
just lift 125 right out of the
Right.
gate. I gotta start with 10.
Yeah, you got to start with exactly. Or if you're with
Yep.
me, you start even lower. Okay. So anyway, you start where you're uncomfortable. It's
Mhm.
not, you're a little bit out of breath. Okay. But
Stretching you,
it's
stretching you.
stretching you. You are looking forward to it being over, but you're not out of your mind. Okay. So I'm doing this dual thing here.
Yeah,
You're stretching yourself. You have to breathe it down a little bit in a sexual engagement. You're letting the other in, but you're not, I mean, emotionally, you're letting them in, but you're not trying to prove something by rushing ahead of where you can be.
exactly. And the proving, what I see is proving my worth and value, proving that I am good enough in bed sexually, because again, that
Mm.
comparison of other
Right.
partners or experiences sexually being brought into that previous relationship. And so there is
Right.
that coming through,
Well,
which
that's
is
the other
not.
piece, is figuring out if someone is afraid, like what specifically am I afraid of? Am I afraid that once I have sex, they're going to no longer value me? Am I afraid I'm going to be seen as insufficient? Because it's going to be important to figure out what is the thing that I'm afraid this could prove or disprove. What am I
Yeah.
going to lose? What am I going to lose control of?
Yeah.
Because that's going to be really important too, because, we like sex when we feel that it's connected to a sense of freedom and validation. And
Hmm.
when it's not both of those things, then we're not going to like it. Okay. So if we feel like it's a trap, or we feel like we're going to, I don't mean a trap, but like we feel like, "Oh, I'm going to do this and then maybe he's not going to see me the same way," or I'm going to do this and now I have
I'm
to have sex all
rejected.
the time, or yeah, now I'm going to be,
Yeah.
well, you're not going to want to have it, and you're not going to be excited about it. That's for sure. And so,
Or you're going to have it hyper vigilantly.
yeah, yeah.
Right?
Or you might be having it because you're trying to earn something
Earn
now,
that.
but none
Mhm.
of this is going to be contributing to the eros in your life. And what I mean by eros is the sense of being alive and well and joyful and expansive.
Right.
And so you don't want to rush ahead of where you can be, but also if there's a real fear, you have to, it would be again helpful to talk to a therapist to sort out, where do I have to get clear inside of myself here? Like,
Mhm.
I'm not turning my sense of self over to this person, and I continue to be a chooser.
Yes.
He
That's the
is not
language
my
that I use.
measure.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's
He is
not my
not.
measure. Like, I want him to love me and accept me, but he's not my measure.
Mm,
Also,
mm.
let's say that you've been married to somebody who's been unfaithful and, strip clubs or whatever the thing is that's been going on. I understand the comparative element, but in a way, here's my challenge to it is like, look, this is somebody who's got issues, like who doesn't know how to love. Okay. Now I'm not trying to say that makes them the world's worst human, but like they are
I know.
not in a position, okay, depending on what the level of issue is. Cause sometimes you
Right.
a spouse who's
Right.
looking
Right.
at porn versus somebody who's been, chronically unfaithful, very different people. But
Yes.
that this is not about me sexual production. And so if I'm partnered with somebody who has not been able to manage their sexuality, hasn't been able to manage their honesty, hasn't been able to really choose or love me, like it's not really great judgment to turn my sense of value over to somebody with impaired judgment, right? And I'm not trying to say you're better than them, but like why am I turning my sense of self over to somebody who doesn't yet know how to love?
You're 100% right. Again, that sense of self, and where are we basing that off of? Who are we basing that off of? And what experience are we basing that off of? And now that you know who this person is and their behaviors, because you've had
Yes.
that reality collapse, then we actually need to create a healthy reality of ourself and this person. And I understand that takes time. It's why healing is a journey
Hmm. Hmm.
to unpack, right? All of those fragmentations of the reality you were living in versus now, but that also needs to shift your reality, like you're saying, of who we were comparing, that bar, right? Is that the bar that we're gonna judge our worth and value and enoughness on this
Right.
person that
Right.
made
Who are
those
we handing
choices.
this over to in
Who
this
are we really
judgment?
giving that to? Yeah,
Yeah.
let's take that back. Let's be the choosers. Let's take that agency back. 100%
And a good again, it's like
agree with
testing
that.
your faith in life, because if you think the world is all about measuring up and trying to prove yourself to cruel, harsh people, that's not a lot of faith in life. I mean, and anyone who's
Right.
doing that, I know has come by it honestly, but it's a pretty brutal world in which you're never going to be safe.
Right.
You have to believe in a better world than that and only accept better than that. Like, it's much better to be alone than to be with someone who doesn't know how to love, doesn't want to love.
Mhm.
Much better to get a dog. They do know how to love.
For cats. No, it's true, but I also know that a lot of you listening have that fear of being alone, and I would challenge your idea of alone in that definition compared to what you just said there.
Mhm.
Because I think it is better to be alone with a healthy sense of self
Oh, 100%.
and being true to yourself and knowing yourself, dating yourself, loving yourself, than being with someone that is harmful that,
Yeah,
then
there's no loneliness like being
mm-mm,
with someone
mm.
who doesn't love you. That's terribly lonely. And
Yeah.
alone is different than lonely.
Yes. Yes.
Lonely is I need someone to make me okay. Alone is I'm just with myself, but if there's peace there, that's a big deal.
It is a huge deal, and that's the goal. It's what we wanna find. I encourage my clients to find when they're coming out of something like this. A lot of times it's that I don't wanna repeat, right? Rinse and repeat. I don't wanna get into a wrong relationship again.
Mhm.
Know that that fear exists, and so we need to do everything we've been talking about today, unpack a lot of why we chose to be and attract in the first place without shame or blame,
Yeah.
and self-explore. So something else that I would love to have your opinion on that again, I don't think it's talked about enough of, and something that I wasn't entirely prepared for before I entered another sexual relationship after betrayal and unhealthy, is the natural triggers and emotional triggers that body triggers that came even though my partner is healthy, we have a healthy relationship, there's healthy sex. In the beginning of that sexual relationship, I felt triggered. I
Mhm.
had a lot of experiences that didn't feel, quote, "safe,"
Mhm.
and yet it had nothing to do with the reality.
Right. Sure.
I feel like this doesn't get talked about, and so you have women that I think, in a sense, their body is warning them of this, but they don't have a
Right.
connection to it. So, any experience or information, I just would love to
Yeah,
open this
sure.
kind of
So there's I
conversation.
think this is not my expertise, so just with that caveat, this is what I'll say is that I think people can get triggered based on either things that are actually happening and their limbic is signaling to them this is not good, this is not, and sometimes we don't listen to it because we dismiss it or want to believe something else. And then we can get triggered, which is just our brain saying, like, watch out, this has not gone well before. And even though it is a different situation, it's like the brain is being overly helpful
Right,
and
right.
signaling, in an unhelpful way. And I think that it's important to figure out which one of those it is. I have a friend who was in Ukraine when the Russians first came in, and her house was bombed on day 4. And she came over to the United States and was here, and then there was a thunderstorm, and she was sleeping in our basement, and just the sound of it ricocheting off the mountains and so on was just very similar to the and so she was 100% biologically triggered, but her brain was saying, "I know it's a thunderstorm. I know it's a thunderstorm," but her limbic brain did not care. So
Right.
that is to say she wasn't confused about reality, but her brain was still in a big reaction. Now we can talk about both things because sometimes you're in the same, you're in a brutal situation again and you're having a reaction because it's on repeat. Then there's times when no, it's incongruent. And when it's incongruent and you know that it is, it still means caring for your regressive brain, okay? Because you don't want to rush ahead of where your limbic can basically join you. You
Right.
want to, though, stress your limbic a little bit. Okay. So going back to the sort of exercise idea, You want to, in a stepwise fashion, first of all, have compassion that your brain is trying to help you. It doesn't want you to be hurt again.
Right.
So it's being overly helpful, but nonetheless, you can have compassion for the fact that it's on high alert
Mhm.
on around something as vulnerable as sex and intimacy.
Yeah.
And so if you can have some compassion for it, and then you want to basically po- positive meaning, intimate engagement is very good for the brain and it's very good for healing. But intimate connection is like we can be there together. I can relax and settle down and be with you. And I can be as exposed sexually as I can handle with a little bit of anxiety.
Yeah.
So I'm stepping into more intimacy, but I'm managing my own reactivity and settling my mind out because as you're able to settle your mind down, your limbic is learning that, okay, she didn't die. Everything's okay. Maybe we don't have to work so hard. Now, sometimes the limbic can still show up again 5 days later after you've done this and be like, you know what? I changed my mind. You should be afraid. Okay. Right. So go into regressions, okay, that are
Right.
still not based in reality. But it's like, again, the brain is just trying to, just like you can have these sort of recurring moments of fear, but again, if you can be compassionate towards it and you continue to check what is real and
Yeah.
continue to push yourself into, again, in a thoughtful way, you're not just jumping into something, into what stretches you a bit, which is again a test of your faith in life and in
Mhm.
yourself.
Mhm.
That's how you work with the body and the brain. And of course,
Yeah.
EMDR and other kinds of trauma therapies can, of course, be very helpful, but in the intimate engagement
Yeah.
with a partner.
Everything you're saying makes sense to me, and I'm always going back to the body and believing the body first. When you've experienced this kind of trauma, I just want to give permission to believe that part of you that's a superpower that says, "Hey, danger," because it's never going to let you down. Its
Mm.
job is to never let that happen again. So I think believing that first and then assessing the reality of the
Yeah, or at least
situation.
having compassion, just being grateful to it. Like,
Yeah,
okay,
just
it's like
like,
it's
"Thank you."
inconvenient. It's exactly.
Right, right in the
Yeah,
middle. I mean, really,
yeah.
it's like, "Oh my gosh, is this really happening right now?" And yet when we're talking about so again, addressing these fears that a lot of you women have and men have of, like, being with someone to hold space for that, I just wanna say that right there, you're looking for someone that will hold space for that, that understands that
Definitely.
as well, because to give room for this experience and how that can be intimate.
Yep,
And that's been my experience.
100%. Oh,
Even
yeah.
saying, "Hold on, I'm in
Yeah,
a trigger
100%.
response."
If you have a collaborative partner, that's how your brain
Yes.
starts to settle down. He's
Yes.
not gonna take this all personally. He's not gonna get mad and like, that that they really want you to be okay, and they're willing to say, "Hey, like, the most important thing is we're together, and it's alright. Whatever happens."
Right.
That's when your brain's like, "Okay, this is news of a difference. This is a different pattern." Okay, because the
Yes,
brain
we're
has good
having
pattern recognition.
we're having an emotionally corrective experience, a
Yeah,
sexually corrective experience, and you want to have
that's
those.
right.
That's the faith you're talking about, is we
That's
have to
right.
lean in
That's right.
to the risk of these triggers and
That's right.
responses in order to create
A
something
different
different.
a different possibility. That's right.
Yeah, yeah, so it takes stretching the muscle, it takes leaning in, but just knowing that if it happens, it's not wrong and something's not wrong with you. I think just wrapping up, going back to this sense of self and cultivating a connection with self and your own sexual desires, knowing what is okay with your body and what isn't right now. I know there were certain things that were part of the sexual abuse that
Mm.
I had to be very clear boundary wise,
Yeah,
sexual. This isn't
yeah,
going to happen. And when I start to feel a sense of self betrayal, that is my own personal red flag,
yep,
indicating this
that's right,
leading into an unhealthy sexual experience.
that's right.
It has nothing to do with my partner.
Yep,
I'm in charge of that.
you're
Can you
doing something that's not good for you. Right, exactly.
right? Any
Definitely.
thoughts to that? Just
Well,
how
yeah, just I think that your brain is questioning, "Can I trust you?" Right? Because if you think of your limbic as the
right.
more regressive part of you, by regressive, I mean like the earlier part of your brain. It's primitive.
Yeah.
It's like looking for this basic question of, "Are you safe?" If it thinks you're checked out up there and you're not paying attention, it's gonna be like rattling the cage. I mean, it's but if it's if you are consistently getting better at making choices that are not working against you, that you are able to see, like we usually aren't treated much better than we treat ourselves, right? And
Right.
so how do I expect to be treated? And of course, I'm not talking about a defiant, like you have to do this for me kind of thing, but like that I'm basically not going to be with someone that isn't respectful of my dignity. That the
Right.
more the limbic tracks that you're doing that, the more it can settle down and not be showing up in unhelpful times. If it thinks you're not doing it, it's going to show up a lot. Now,
Yeah.
it's not always right, okay? It's not always right. But if it thinks you're wobbly, it may show up
Mhm.
more. Mhm.
Right. So we need to work on self-regulating.
Mhm.
And part of healing after this kind of experience, traumatic experience, is learning how to create that safety secure within yourself so that you can co-regulate and notice the difference in
Mm.
that experience as well. There was I might regret being this vulnerable, but whatever. So there was one experience that I had again in my now marriage, and a sexual experience where I did start to self betray,
Mhm.
and I cried
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
I realized what I was doing.
Mhm.
And it was interesting to me that even though, again, the situation, the trust in my partner, the reality was not that something unhealthy or dangerous was happening,
Mhm.
but I did
Mhm.
get triggered from a
Mhm.
past experience and didn't
Mhm.
honor
Yeah. Good.
first. I didn't
Good.
give compassion to
Yeah.
myself first. And as
Right.
it continued, I recognized what was happening and I was
Yep.
just sad for myself. And I share that vulnerably just
Sure.
to also let you listeners know that, like, you hear us talking and we're giving you things to do, to practice. I know a lot of your brains are putting a checklist together of things
Mm.
to do to, again, avoid pain or injury or this kind of harmful experience. And I share this to let you know it might happen.
Sure. Well, yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong, and I did give myself compassion and didn't go harshly on myself, but it was an opportunity for me to go, "Hold on,
Yeah.
how might I be ignoring myself in other ways right now to get to this point?"
Mhm.
And use that as an opportunity to check back in with your body,
Yeah.
your mind, your spirit. So I don't,
Definitely.
right, wanna
Right, and and
indicate that
and
you're
and
gonna get it
again, it's like
perfect.
kind of reconciliation with yourself. I mean, so yes, it's very easy under enough stress, tired enough, whatever, to just regress into something old that isn't good for you and
Yeah,
to wake up to, "Oh my gosh, why am I doing this?" Or "How did I get here?" Or "I'm just not listening to myself." And again, if we can have compassion for ourselves, which is different than saying it doesn't matter, because it does matter how I relate to myself, but okay, here I am. I want to do this differently. That's just part of what growth looks like. It's an
yeah,
important process. And it also, if you can trust yourself, right, you're going to be more open to intimacy in every sense, right? Because
mhm,
you like who you are, you're comfortable with who you are, and you're not going to let yourself be mistreated. And so if you have developed that core, then you can create a good relationship because you have the relationship with yourself solid
yes.
enough.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, one last thing, and then I promise we'll wrap up. I could keep you forever. But something that I would love to hear your thoughts around is the intimacy triangle, so to speak, where we have these different levels of intimacy, experiences of intimacy outside of sexual and physical. And how important would you say, or how would you frame this, where learning how to cultivate healthy intimacy in these other areas and how that impacts the sexual healthy experiences that we have
Can you just
with
give me an
ourselves?
example? I don't know if I know exactly what you mean by
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So for example, sometimes if we're jumping into sexual experiences and there hasn't been enough
Emotional
emotional
connection. Yeah.
connection, cognitive connection, psychological connection, spiritual connection, because the way I look at it and experienced it is all of those other levels of intimacy, when I can bring those into the sexual experience. So now my sexual experience
Mhm.
includes talking, sharing ideas and experiences,
Mhm.
emotions,
Right.
rather than it just being a transactional experience.
Right.
Sometimes I see that not being cultivated enough, and I hesitate even using that word. I
Mm.
think that's very individual, but
What I would
yeah.
say is I mean, first of all, sexual connection. Listen, I understand that some people may see this differently, but I think our sexuality is very connected to the core of who we are. It's really connected to our soul. Whether or not you're a religious person, it's really tied into the core of who we are. And so that doesn't mean we have to be careful with it. Many of us are much more casual around it. But I think if you are way ahead in the sexual intimacy than you are in other elements, it's worth looking at why. I mean, because sometimes that's a way of trying to feel connected, trying to
Mhm.
get acceptance. I think women as a group are generally wired to be more careful, not because they have necessarily seen sex as a bad thing, but because women are more biologically vulnerable. So if you look at women as a group and men as a group, men have less on the line sexually. And so they tend to be more comfortable with casualness around sex than women as a group, all the research shows. So if women are rushing ahead, I'm always interested in thinking about like, what is that about? And is it for as healthy of a reason as one might think or not? And is there some level of self-betrayal in it? Because I think, women's romantic literature, erotic literature is always about this person loves the whole woman, chooses her, like is into her as a person and wants to have sex with her and thinks she's very hot. Okay, so all those things are in that literature, but
Yes.
it's the whole woman. It's not a grope, it's a grab. It's a grab of the entire woman, right? Okay, that's sexy. So am I selling out something here by rushing ahead in that way? And it's just something to understand or look at in ourselves if we are. Mhm.
Yeah. Yep. You just answered that beautifully. I
Mhm.
love I love that. Anything else that you would want to share as we close today? Again, giving the fears that are
Mm.
so valid around leaning into sexual experience after sexual betrayal and abuse.
I mean, I think it's just very, very noble emotional work to grow beyond traumatic or abusive situations because it's it's an act of faith. And I don't mean in the religious sense. I mean in this like believing in a world in which one can love and be loved, believing in a possibility of claiming my dignity, even when people that have been important to me have abused that uncertainty in me.
Mm.
And can I still grow into a compassionate relationship to myself and my own humanity and to others and their humanity? That is the work of life. Many
Mhm.
of us don't do it. It's scary, it's hard. But I think when we do it as imperfectly as it is, when we lean into finding a better way, a way that affords us more dignity, that allows us to care about someone else, that's the way we change the world. It happens at the level of our own relationships, and it's the most courageous work there is. And a lot of people use religion to get away from that.
Yeah.
Others use it to go towards it, right? Some people use atheism to go away from that. Some use atheism to go towards it. So what I'm trying to say is the most important work we do is really in our capacity to accept ourselves and to accept others, to love ourselves and love others. It's very noble work, however we come by it.
It's humanitarian work. I love it.
That's right.
Thank you so much for sharing this conversation with me. Much
Yeah,
needed.
you're
So I
welcome.
appreciate it. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I hope this episode was helpful for those of you who might have had some of these questions, some of these fears. It's one of those conversations that can go on and on and on because I know that there's a lot of different circumstances and situations and thoughts and beliefs that this might have brought up for you. And like Jennifer said, getting that individual work around this for you and your particular fears and circumstances is so valuable. One of the other things that I wanted to mention when I was talking about the levels of intimacy, it is also why I put together the self-paced course, Intimacy Within, where I do walk through all 7 different levels of intimacy: verbal, cognitive, emotional, psychological, spiritual, physical, and sexual. How to cultivate those within yourself first before cultivating that with someone else is key. If you are interested in taking that self-paced course, and I made it self-paced so that you can take it at your own pace, take time to really practice with all of the things that I give you in each one of those levels, can be one of the best things that you do to connect back towards you after trauma. For more information or to go ahead and get that course today, click the show notes or go to amiewoolsey.com. When we think about the relationship that we want in the future, I just want to remind you that you can create that when you start to cultivate that within, because you can. Take care, everybody.